It was a warm afternoon when he was driving home from work, taking the usual route through the countryside. The road was mostly empty, stretching far into the horizon with fields on both sides. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over everything. As he drove, he noticed something unusual ahead, a car parked on the side of the road, and next to it, a woman standing with her arms crossed, looking worried. As he got closer, he saw that she had a flat tire. For a moment, he thought about driving past. He was tired after a long day, and stopping would mean getting home late. But something about the way she stood there, anxiously checking her phone, made him slow down. His mother had always told him, if you can help someone, do it without expecting anything in return. He pulled over and stepped out of his car. The woman looked relieved as he approached. "Need some help?" he asked with a friendly smile. She sighed, clearly frustrated. "Yes, please. I don't know how to change a tire, and my phone has no signal out here. I've been waiting for someone to pass by for almost an hour." He nodded and walked over to the car. The flat tire was completely deflated, and the spare tire was in the trunk. He rolled up his sleeves and got to work, loosening the lug nuts and replacing the tire. As he worked, the woman stood nearby, watching him with curiosity. She seemed a bit nervous but grateful. "Not many people stop to help strangers these days," she said. He chuckled. "Well, I figured you could use a hand. It's not safe being stranded out here alone." The job was done in about 10 minutes. He wiped his hands on a rag and stepped back. "All set. You should be good to go now." The woman smiled and reached into her purse. "Thank you so much. Let me at least pay you for your trouble." He shook his head. "No need. Just drive safe." She looked at him for a moment, as if debating something, then nodded. "Well, thank you. Really." She got into her car, started the engine, and drove off, waving at him through the window. He watched her disappear down the road before getting back into his own car and heading home. At that moment, he didn't think much about it. He had just helped someone, nothing more, nothing less. The next day, something feels off. The next morning, he woke up early and went about his usual routine, showering, grabbing coffee, and heading out for work. But as soon as he stepped outside, he noticed something strange. A black SUV was parked down the street. He didn't think much of it at first. It was a quiet neighborhood, and people sometimes parked their cars nearby. But as he drove to work, he saw the same SUV in his rearview mirror. At first, he brushed it off as a coincidence. But the more he drove, the more it felt deliberate. Whenever he changed lanes, the SUV did too. Whenever he slowed down, it kept pace. His heart started to race. Was someone following him? He decided to test his suspicion. Instead of taking the direct route to work, he made an unexpected turn into a small shopping plaza. He parked and waited. Sure enough, the black SUV pulled in too and parked a few spots away. That's when he knew, this wasn't a coincidence. He tried to stay calm. Maybe it was all in his head. Maybe it was just another driver going to the same place. But something about it didn't sit right. As he got out of his car, he glanced at the SUV. The windows were tinted, making it impossible to see inside. Who was in there? And why were they following him? His mind raced through possibilities. Had he done something wrong? Had he accidentally upset someone? Then, a thought hit him, the woman with the flat tire. Could she have something to do with this? He didn't know why, but a strange feeling told him that helping her wasn't just an ordinary good deed. And whatever was happening now, was only the beginning. The black SUV sat there, parked just a few spots away. It wasn't moving, but it wasn't leaving either. He could feel his pulse quicken. Was he imagining things? Maybe it was just another driver who happened to be going the same way as him. But deep down, he knew something wasn't right. Trying to act normal, he walked into a nearby coffee shop. The bell above the door chimed as he stepped inside, the familiar scent of roasted beans and fresh pastries filling the air. He ordered a coffee, but his mind wasn't on the drink. Through the window, he could see the SUV still parked outside. He decided to test something. Instead of going straight to work, he took his coffee and walked right back out to his car. If this was just a coincidence, the SUV wouldn't react. But the moment he got into his car and pulled out of the parking lot, the SUV did the same. His hands tightened around the steering wheel. It was no accident. He was being followed. A strange encounter. His heart pounded as he drove down the road, keeping an eye on the SUV in his rearview mirror. It wasn't trying to hide anymore. It was just there, trailing behind him. He needed to think fast. Instead of heading straight to work, he took a few unexpected turns. First left, then right, then another left. Each time, the SUV followed. At this point, there was no doubt. Someone inside that car was watching him. His mind raced. Why? Who were they? What did they want? Then, a thought hit him, the woman from yesterday. Could she have anything to do with this? He didn't even know her name. All he did was help change a flat tire. That wasn't the kind of thing that got you followed. Or was it? Trying to confront them. His instincts told him to drive to a police station, but something inside him wanted answers. So instead, he did something risky. At the next stoplight, he pulled over to the side of the road and parked. The SUV slowed down but didn't stop right away. It kept rolling forward before finally coming to a stop just a few feet behind him. He took a deep breath. This was it. Stepping out of his car, he walked straight toward the SUV. If they wanted to follow him, he'd make them explain why. But just as he reached the vehicle, the driver suddenly sped off. The tires screeched as the black SUV disappeared down the road, leaving him standing there, confused and full of questions. Whoever they were, they didn't want to be confronted. And that made him even more uneasy. A chilling discovery. The rest of the day at work was a blur. He tried to focus, but his mind kept drifting back to the SUV. The way it followed him, the way it took off the moment he got too close, it just didn't add up. By the time he got home that evening, the sun had already set. He parked his car and sat for a moment, staring at his steering wheel. He couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. And he was right. As he got out of his car, something caught his eye, a small envelope taped to his front door. His stomach twisted as he walked up and peeled it off. There was no name, no return address. Just a plain white envelope. With slightly shaking hands, he opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper. And written on it, in bold, black letters, was one simple message. Stay away. The words on the note sent a chill down his spine. Stay away. Stay away from what? From who? His eyes darted around the dimly lit street, scanning for any sign of movement. The SUV was gone, but that didn't mean he was alone. His heartbeat pounded in his ears as he stepped inside, locking the door behind him. He flipped on the lights and stared at the note again. What had he gotten himself into? A sleepless night. The words kept repeating in his head as he lay in bed, unable to sleep. Maybe he should have ignored the woman with the flat tire. Maybe he should have just kept driving. But that wasn't the kind of person he was. He couldn't shake the feeling that this had something to do with her. But why? He didn't even know her. As much as he wanted answers, he also knew one thing: this wasn't normal. Who leaves a threatening note on someone's door just for helping a stranger? He needed to be careful. Searching for clues. The next morning, he woke up feeling groggy but determined. He wasn't just going to sit around and wait for something else to happen. If the woman was involved, he needed to find her. He thought back to where he met her, that quiet road outside town. It wasn't a busy place, which meant she probably wasn't just passing through. Maybe she lived nearby. Maybe she worked somewhere close. It wasn't much to go on, but it was a start. He grabbed his keys and drove back to the spot where he had helped her. The road looked the same, quiet, empty, surrounded by fields. But now, it felt different. Like there was something hidden beneath the surface. He parked and got out, scanning the area. And then, he saw something. The voice sent a chill through his body. "You shouldn't have come." It was a whisper, weak but urgent. He turned his head toward the sound, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. A figure sat in the corner, partially hidden by shadows. His heart pounded as he stepped closer, barely able to make out the shape of a woman. Could it be her? The woman shifted slightly, and as the light hit her face, his stomach twisted. It was her. Face to face. The same woman he had helped on the roadside now sat before him, her clothes disheveled, her face pale. She looked exhausted, scared, like she hadn't slept in days. Her eyes darted toward the open door behind him. "Did anyone follow you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. His throat was dry. "I don't think so," he said, though he wasn't sure. She exhaled shakily and ran a hand through her tangled hair. "You shouldn't be here," she said again. "You don't understand." His mind raced with questions. What was she hiding? Who was after her? And what did it have to do with him? "I found your wallet," he said, holding it up. It had this address in it. She stared at the wallet like it was something dangerous. Then, she closed her eyes and shook her head. "That wasn't for you. The truth begins to unfold." He frowned. "Then who was it for?" She hesitated, biting her lip. After a long pause, she finally spoke. "I was hoping someone else would find it. Someone who could help me." His pulse quickened. "Help you with what?" She looked at him, really looked at him, like she was deciding whether or not to trust him. Finally, she took a deep breath and said, "They're watching me. The black SUV, the people inside it, they want something from me. And they won't stop until they get it." He felt a knot tighten in his stomach. "Who are they?" he asked. Her lips trembled. "I don't know exactly. But I do know they're dangerous. And now that you've helped me." She trailed off, looking at him with regret. "You're in danger too." The warning. His blood ran cold. Danger? Because he had stopped to help her change a tire? It didn't make sense. "I don't even know you," he said, frustration creeping into his voice. "I was just trying to help. Why would they come after me?" Her fingers curled into fists. "Because you were there. Because now you know I exist. And that's enough for them." The weight of her words sank in. It wasn't just about her anymore. Whoever they were, they had noticed him. The black SUV. The note on his door. "Stay away." But it was too late for that now. A plan to escape. She glanced toward the window, her body tense. "We can't stay here," she said. "They might have followed you." He didn't argue. The eerie silence outside was starting to feel suffocating. "Do you have a car?" she asked. He nodded. "Parked down the street." "Good," she said. "We have to leave. Now." His instincts screamed at him to stop, to think this through. But something about her desperation told him she wasn't lying. He had already been followed. Already been warned. And if he walked away now, he knew deep down this wouldn't just go away. "All right," he said. "Let's go." She grabbed a small bag from the floor and followed him out of the house. They hurried down the street toward his car, keeping low, scanning the area. When they reached the vehicle, he unlocked the doors, and they both climbed in. He started the engine. And then, headlights flicked on behind them. A black SUV. Waiting. Watching. The air in the car grew thick with tension. "Drive," she whispered. He didn't need to be told twice. He hit the gas, and the car shot forward. The SUV followed. The chase. His hands gripped the wheel as he sped through the darkened streets. "Where am I going?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Just keep driving," she said, twisting in her seat to watch the SUV. It stayed close, matching their speed, never letting up. "Who are these people?" he asked again. She shook her head. "I don't know exactly. But I know they're connected to something bigger. Something I wasn't supposed to see." His heart pounded. "What did you see?" She hesitated, then whispered, "Something that could ruin them." A cold sweat broke out on his skin. Whatever this was, it was bigger than he had imagined. The SUV suddenly lurched forward, closing the gap. His stomach dropped. "They're trying to run us off the road." A desperate move. He yanked the wheel, swerving onto a side street. The SUV followed, its headlights blinding in the mirror. "Do you know anywhere safe to go?" he asked. She hesitated. "Maybe. But we have to lose them first." His mind raced. Think. Then, an idea hit him. He spotted a narrow alley up ahead. Too small for the SUV to fit through. He veered hard to the right, cutting into the alley. The SUV skidded to a stop behind them, unable to follow. For a brief moment, there was silence. Then, the woman grabbed his arm. "Go. They won't stop looking for us." The escape. He floored the gas and sped through the twisting backstreets until the headlights finally disappeared behind them. Only then did he allow himself to breathe. For now, they were safe. But he knew one thing for sure, this wasn't over. He turned to her. "We need answers," he said. "Tell me everything." She hesitated, her hands shaking. Then, finally, she spoke. "I was in the wrong place at the wrong time," she said. "And now, they want to make sure I never talk." He swallowed hard. "And what exactly did you see?" Her eyes met his, full of fear. She took a deep breath. "A murder." His heart stopped. Everything suddenly made sense. She wasn't just running. She was the only witness to something she was never supposed to see. And now, they were after both of them. The car was silent except for their heavy breathing. His knuckles were white from gripping the wheel, and she sat frozen in the passenger seat, her hands trembling in her lap. A murder. That was what she had seen. That was what this was all about. He swallowed hard, his mind racing. "You need to tell me everything," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. She exhaled shakily. "I shouldn't have told you," she whispered. "I've already put you in enough danger." He let out a humorless laugh. "I think we're past that now, don't you?" She looked at him, her eyes filled with something between guilt and fear. Then, finally, she nodded. And she started talking. "The night everything changed. It was about a week ago," she began. "I had just finished work and was driving home late. I took a shortcut I don't usually take, some old industrial road near the edge of town. Hardly any streetlights, no cameras, quiet. Too quiet." She rubbed her arms as if the memory still made her cold. "As I was driving past an abandoned warehouse, I saw movement. At first, I thought it was nothing. Just my tired eyes playing tricks on me. But then I saw them, 3 men standing over another man. His stomach tightened. They weren't just standing there, were they? He asked. She shook her head. They were beating him. Badly. He could barely stand. And then, she stopped, her voice catching. He glanced at her. Go on. She swallowed hard. One of them pulled out a gun. No hesitation. Just, she made a quick motion with her hand, mimicking the shot. Silence filled the car. She took a shaky breath. They didn't see me, at least not right away. I ducked down, turned off my headlights. My heart was pounding so loud I thought they'd hear it. I should have driven away, but... She hesitated. But what? I pulled out my phone, she admitted. I took a picture. Just one. And that's when I made the biggest mistake of my life. His pulse quickened. They saw you. She nodded. One of them turned his head just as I was putting my phone down. I didn't wait to find out what happened next. I hit the gas and got out of there as fast as I could. She ran a hand through her hair. I thought maybe they hadn't seen my plate. Maybe I was safe. She laughed bitterly. I was wrong. The pursuit begins. The next day, she continued, I started noticing the black SUV. It was always at a distance, always subtle. I tried to convince myself it was a coincidence. But then... She looked down at her lap. They broke into my apartment. His breath caught. They didn't take anything. Not my laptop, not my money, nothing valuable. But I could feel it. They had been there. My drawers were slightly open. My closet door was ajar. They were looking for something. His mind raced. The picture, he said. She nodded. They wanted to know if I still had it. And I did, but I wasn't stupid enough to keep it on my phone. I hid it somewhere safe. She looked at him, her face serious. And now, they know that I know. That's why they're following me. They don't want to scare me. She swallowed hard. They want to silence me. A dangerous decision. He ran a hand over his face, exhaling sharply. This is insane, he muttered. You should go to the police. She let out a hollow laugh. You think I haven't tried? She asked. I went to the police station 2 days ago. Told them everything, well, almost everything. Left out the picture. And do you know what happened? He didn't answer, but he had a bad feeling. Nothing, she said bitterly. No investigation, no follow-up. Just a couple of officers who gave me a sympathetic nod and told me to be careful. He frowned. So they're connected. Either that, or they're too scared to do anything, she said. Either way, I'm on my own. She turned to him, her eyes searching his face. And now, so are you. He felt a chill run down his spine. If the people following her were really as powerful as she said, then the moment he picked up that wallet, his fate was sealed. There was no going back. A plan to fight back. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, he asked, "Where's the picture?" Her eyes widened slightly. Why? Because if these guys are willing to kill over it, then it must be important, he said. Which means it's the only leverage we have. She hesitated. I can't just tell you where it is, she said. If they get to you. They won't, he said firmly. She sighed. I buried it. He blinked. Buried? She nodded. In a small metal box, behind an old gas station outside of town. No cameras, no people. Just a stretch of land no one pays attention to. It was risky. But it was also smart. All right, he said. Then that's where we're going. Her eyes widened. Now? He nodded. The longer we wait, the more danger we're in. If we get that picture, we have proof. We can take it to someone who can do something. Her hands trembled slightly, but she nodded. Okay. The black SUV returns. He turned the key, bringing the engine back to life. As they pulled out of the alley, he checked the mirrors. The streets were empty. But he had a gut feeling that wouldn't last. Sure enough, as they turned onto the main road, a pair of headlights appeared behind them. A familiar, dark SUV. She saw it too. They found us, she whispered. His grip on the wheel tightened. Then we make sure they lose us, he said, stepping on the gas. A race against time. The car roared forward, speeding through the streets as the SUV kept pace. They won't stop, she said, panic creeping into her voice. Neither will I, he shot back. He took a sharp turn, cutting through side streets, trying to put distance between them. But the SUV was relentless. Then, up ahead, he saw it, a train crossing, gates lowering, lights flashing. An idea sparked in his mind. Without a second thought, he floored it. The car shot forward, racing against the train. She gasped. We won't make it. Yes, we will, he said through clenched teeth. The train horn blared. The gates were almost fully down. He swerved past them just in time. The train roared past behind them, blocking the SUV completely. They had made it. For now. What comes next? The gas station wasn't far now. But they both knew the SUV wouldn't stop. They'll find another way around, she said. I know, he replied. They had bought themselves time, but not much. And once they reached the buried evidence, everything would change. Because the second they dug up that picture, they would know exactly what kind of monsters they were up against. The road stretched ahead, empty except for the flickering neon sign of an old gas station in the distance. His heart pounded as he gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles still white from the chase. The black SUV was no longer in sight, but he knew better than to assume they were safe. They'll find another way around, she muttered, staring at the dark horizon behind them. I know, he said, keeping his eyes on the road. They had only bought themselves time, nothing more. As the car pulled into the gas station's cracked and faded parking lot, an eerie silence surrounded them. A single street lamp buzzed overhead, casting long, distorted shadows. This is it? He asked, glancing around. She nodded. Yeah. The box is buried just past the fence behind the station. He killed the engine. Then we don't have much time. Digging up the truth. They climbed out of the car quickly but cautiously, scanning the area for any sign of movement. The gas station was abandoned, just an empty building with broken windows and an old rusted pump. Behind it, a stretch of barren land extended into darkness, a few patches of dry grass swaying in the breeze. She led the way, stepping over the cracked pavement until they reached the fence, a short, rusted thing barely holding itself together. I buried it near that tree, she whispered, pointing to a scraggly, twisted oak that looked like it hadn't seen life in years. They hurried over, the soft crunch of dirt beneath their shoes the only sound. She pulled out a small pocket knife and started digging at a spot near the base of the tree. He knelt beside her, using his hands to claw away the dirt. Minutes passed. The silence was too quiet. Then, his fingers scraped metal. Got it, he whispered, pulling out a small, dented metal box, about the size of a cigar case. She brushed the dirt off, her hands shaking. This is it, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He exhaled sharply. They finally had it. The proof. The one thing that could bring the killers down. But then. A sound. A car engine. His head snapped up, and his stomach twisted. Headlights appeared in the distance. No more running. We need to go, he hissed, grabbing her arm. But she didn't move. No, she said, her voice suddenly steady. No more running. His pulse thundered. What? She turned to him, her eyes burning with something fierce. This ends tonight. He hesitated. The logical part of his brain screamed at him to run, to get back to the car, to escape while they still could. But another part of him, the part that had been dragged into this nightmare, the part that knew they would never stop running, knew she was right. If they didn't face this now, they never would. His jaw clenched. All right, he said. Let's end it. Face to face with danger. The black SUV rolled into the parking lot, its headlights cutting through the darkness like knives. The engine rumbled like a beast waiting to pounce. He stepped in front of her, shielding her as the doors swung open. Two men stepped out. The first was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a suit that didn't quite fit the dusty surroundings. His expression was cold, calculated. The kind of man who never raised his voice because he never needed to. The second was leaner, meaner. His fingers twitched at his side like he was itching to grab something, a weapon, maybe. Hand it over, the taller one said. His voice was smooth, like oil on glass. They didn't even pretend not to know what they were here for. He glanced at her. She was staring at the men, her jaw tight, her fists clenched around the metal box. No, she said. The lean man took a step forward. You don't understand what you're playing with, he sneered. You think you're the first person to get in our way? He could feel her shaking beside him, but she didn't back down. I think I'll be the last, she shot back. The taller man sighed, shaking his head. I was hoping we could do this the easy way. He raised a hand. A third figure stepped out of the SUV. And that's when the air turned to ice. Because the third man, the one who had been waiting in the back seat, hidden in the shadows, was someone he recognized. Someone she recognized. A police officer. Not just any officer, the one she had reported the murder to. The very man who had told her to be careful. And now, here he was. With the killers. Nowhere to hide. You're making this harder than it needs to be, the officer said, his voice smooth but deadly. His badge glistened under the street lamp, but it meant nothing now. Give us the box, and you can walk away. But they wouldn't walk away. They both knew that. He took a deep breath, his mind racing. They were outnumbered. Outmatched. But not outsmarted. His eyes darted to their car, his phone was inside. If he could just get to it, if he could send the picture to someone before these men got their hands on them, they'd still have a chance. But the second he moved, they'd react. So he did the only thing he could think of. He looked at her and said, "Run." A desperate escape. She hesitated for half a second. And then, she ran. The men reacted instantly. The lean one lunged for her. He threw a punch. It landed square on the man's jaw, sending him stumbling backward. But the other two were already moving. She sprinted towards the car, clutching the box to her chest. The officer pulled out a gun. His blood ran cold. "No," he shouted, diving toward him. The gun went off. The sound shattered the night. She screamed. The bullet hit the ground, inches from her feet. But she didn't stop. She reached the car, yanked the door open. He struggled against the officer, grappling for the gun. She found his phone. Her fingers flew across the screen. She uploaded the photo. Sent it. The officer's eyes widened. "It's too late," she whispered, shaking. "It's out there now." For the first time, they looked afraid. A shocking twist. A new sound filled the night. Sirens. Flashing red and blue lights painted the gas station in color. They all froze. She let out a shaky breath. They had sent the picture to the right person. More cars pulled up, marked ones this time. The corrupt officer's expression twisted into something unreadable. He looked at the taller man, at the lean man still groaning on the ground. Then, without a word, they ran. But it was too late. Within seconds, the real police swarmed the station. She collapsed against the car, clutching the metal box as if it were her lifeline. He exhaled, his legs nearly giving out beneath him. It was over. Almost. Because as they watched the officers cuff the men and shove them into cars, he knew one thing for certain. The real danger wasn't just these men. It was whoever they worked for. And that person? They weren't done yet. The gas station parking lot was still swarming with flashing lights. Officers moved in every direction, securing the crime scene, collecting statements, and leading the corrupt men into custody. But even as the situation seemed under control, there was a nagging feeling in the air, something was still off. He leaned against the car, his breathing unsteady. She sat beside him, gripping the small metal box so tightly her knuckles had turned white. One of the officers, a woman in a crisp uniform, approached them. She had a kind but serious face, the kind of person who had seen too much in her years of service. "You did the right thing," she said, her voice steady. "This evidence, it's big. Bigger than we even thought." She hesitated, looking between the two of them before adding, "But you're not safe yet." The words sent a chill down his spine. The shadow behind the curtain. "What do you mean?" he asked, pushing off the car. The officer glanced over her shoulder before stepping closer. Her voice dropped just above a whisper. "We're dealing with a network here. These guys? The ones we just arrested? They're small players. But whoever they work for, they won't let this go." The woman beside him tightened her grip on the box. "But we have proof now," she said. "That's enough, right?" The officer sighed. "It should be. But if they've managed to get a police officer on their payroll, it means they have reach, power. And powerful people? They don't go down easily." A sick feeling settled in his stomach. "So what now?" he asked. The officer's radio crackled. Someone on the other end was calling her name. She hesitated, then looked them both in the eyes. "I'll do what I can to keep you safe. But for now, lay low. And if you hear from anyone you don't recognize? If you notice anything strange? Don't ignore it." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving them standing in the dim glow of the gas station lights. Nowhere feels safe. They drove in silence. The streets were quiet, almost eerily so. Every time headlights appeared in the rearview mirror, his heart jumped. Every dark alley, every parked car felt like a threat. "They're not done," she murmured, staring out the window. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "I know." She looked down at the box in her lap. This is worth a lot to them." He glanced at her. "What's in it, exactly?" She hesitated. "I haven't looked yet." He blinked. "You're telling me we've been chased, shot at, and nearly killed for something we haven't even seen?" She exhaled sharply, running a hand through her hair. "I wanted to wait until we were safe. I didn't want to risk losing it before we knew exactly what we had." "Well," he said, pulling into a dark parking lot, "I think it's time." The truth inside the box. The motel was old, with flickering lights and a front desk clerk who barely looked up as they walked past. He paid in cash, not wanting to leave a trace. Inside the room, they locked the door, pulled the curtains shut, and finally set the small metal box between them on the table. She took a deep breath, then slowly pried it open. Inside were several USB drives, a few photographs, and a folded piece of paper. He picked up one of the photos and felt his stomach drop. It was a picture of the police officer, the same one who had been working with the criminals. But he wasn't alone. Beside him stood a man in an expensive suit, shaking hands with another figure whose face was turned away from the camera. She picked up the paper, unfolded it, and scanned the words. Her eyes widened. This is a list of names, she whispered. Politicians. Businessmen. Even more cops. He reached for one of the USB drives. We need to see what's on these. But before they could even move, their phones buzzed at the exact same time. A single text message. From an unknown number. Put the box back. The game of fear. His heart stopped. She stared at the message, her face pale. They know we have it, she whispered. A second message arrived. Final warning. The room felt smaller. The air, heavier. They're watching us, he murmured. She swallowed hard, gripping the phone. What do we do? He thought fast. They couldn't go to the police, not yet. The officer at the gas station had been right. This was bigger than them. But they needed backup. Someone they could trust. And then it hit him. He grabbed his phone and quickly scrolled through his contacts. There was only one person who might be able to help. He pressed the call button. After 3 rings, a groggy voice answered. Hello? I need your help, he said quickly. And I don't have time to explain. A pause. Then. Where are you? A race against time. 30 minutes later, they sat in a dimly lit diner, the box sitting between them. Across the table sat an old friend, someone who had spent years investigating corruption. This is big, he muttered, flipping through the photos. If this gets out, people will fall. She shifted uncomfortably. That's why we need to be careful. The man nodded. You were smart not to go straight to the cops. You don't know who you can trust. He reached for a USB drive. We need to decrypt these. They could hold the real proof, the kind of evidence that can't be denied. She hesitated. How long will that take? The man rubbed his chin. A few hours, if I do it right. They didn't have a few hours. But before they could say anything, the diner door swung open. And their blood ran cold. Because standing in the doorway, staring directly at them, was the man from the photograph. The one in the expensive suit. The one shaking hands with the corrupt cop. And he wasn't alone. Nowhere left to run. The air turned to ice. The man smiled, a slow, deliberate smirk that sent chills down their spines. You kids have been busy, he said smoothly, stepping forward. The few other customers in the diner seemed oblivious, lost in their own conversations. But they knew. They were trapped. He placed a hand on the table, tapping a single finger against the box. I believe you have something that belongs to me. The silence stretched. Then, the old friend made a move. In a flash, he grabbed the USBs, stuffed them into his pocket, and stood. We're leaving, he said, his voice calm but firm. The suited man chuckled. I don't think so. Outside, through the large diner windows, a black SUV pulled up. Their stomachs sank. They weren't going to let them leave. And then, as if the night hadn't twisted enough, the sound of sirens filled the air. The suited man's face darkened. He straightened his tie. Well, he said, sighing. I suppose this conversation isn't over yet. He turned on his heel and walked out. The SUV pulled away. They sat frozen, breathless, staring at each other. They had won this round. But the game was far from over. The air in the diner was heavy with tension. Even though the suited man and his associates had left, the feeling of being watched, of being hunted, lingered. The woman clutched the small metal box to her chest, her hands trembling slightly. The old friend, now their only real ally, kept his eyes on the door as if expecting them to return at any moment. The sirens outside had been their temporary savior, but they all knew the truth: this wasn't over. "Nowhere is safe. We need to move," the old friend muttered. He pulled out a small device from his bag, a pocket-sized laptop, and began plugging in the USB drives. "What are you doing?" he asked, glancing around nervously. The old friend didn't look up. "Decrypting these files. If we don't get this information out soon, they'll make sure it disappears forever." She hesitated. "But if they track us?" "They already have," he interrupted, his voice grim. "The moment you got involved, you became targets. They won't stop until they have this evidence." A sinking feeling settled in his chest. He had only wanted to help a stranger with a flat tire. Now, he was being hunted by powerful people who had everything to lose. The last escape. Within minutes, the old friend had cracked open the first file. His eyes widened. "This is bigger than I thought," he whispered. "Bribery, offshore accounts, murder cover-ups. This isn't just some corrupt cops. This goes up to government officials." She exhaled sharply. "So what do we do?" He clicked rapidly, downloading the files onto multiple hard drives. "We send it to the right people: journalists, independent investigators, people they can't buy off." But before he could press enter, the lights inside the diner flickered. A bad feeling crawled up his spine. And then, the power went out. The hum of the neon signs outside died. The overhead lights in the diner shut down. For a split second, everything was silent. Then, headlights flooded the windows. A black SUV pulled up right outside. His stomach clenched. They had found them. The diner door swung open, and a man in all black stepped in. No suit, no arrogance, just cold, calculated intent. And he was armed. The standoff. Nobody moved. The few customers in the diner barely noticed, lost in their meals and conversations. But they knew what was happening. The man in black took slow, measured steps toward their table. "You've made some dangerous choices," he said, his voice eerily calm. His eyes flickered to the old friend's laptop. "Hand it over." The old friend shut the laptop. "If we do, we die anyway." A smile. "That's true." The woman gripped his hand under the table. No escape. No way out. And then, a siren. Not outside. Inside the diner. The emergency alarm blared through the building. Red lights flashed. Customers gasped, confused, as a voice came over the intercom. "Emergency evacuation in progress. Please exit immediately." The armed man stiffened, his hand twitching toward his weapon. That was their only chance. "Run," she whispered. They bolted. The final chase. They pushed past the panicked customers, sprinting toward the back exit. The armed man shouted behind them, but the chaos in the diner slowed him down. Out the back door, they ran into the alley. The night air was cold, but they had no time to think. Footsteps pounded behind them. "We need a car," he gasped. The woman scanned the lot. An old delivery van sat idling nearby. The driver had stepped out, distracted by the commotion. Without hesitation, she yanked the door open. "Get in." He jumped in the passenger seat while the old friend dived into the back. She hotwired the van in seconds. The engine roared to life. And then, gunshots. The windshield cracked. The armed man was running straight toward them. "Go," he shouted. She floored it. The truth goes public. The van raced down the empty streets, weaving through late-night traffic. The old friend was in the back, still working on sending out the files. "They shut down my access," he muttered. "They're trying to stop me." His fingers flew over the keyboard. He wasn't just sending files anymore, he was broadcasting. Live. To news outlets, social media, public forums. Anywhere people could see. And then. Ding. A message flashed on the screen. Files uploaded. Broadcast live. The evidence was out. The world would know. But before they could celebrate, the black SUV was back. It swerved behind them, closing in fast. "They won't stop," she breathed. He gritted his teeth. "Then we make sure they can't follow us." The SUV sped up, ramming into the back of the van. The old friend clung to the seats. "I hope you have a plan." She did. And it involved the unfinished bridge ahead. The final move. The half-constructed bridge loomed before them. Beyond it? A steep drop. She pressed the gas harder. "They won't follow us," she murmured. The SUV was gaining. The bridge was getting closer. And then, she turned the wheel sharply. The van skidded sideways. The SUV didn't stop in time. It hit the barrier, and went over the edge. They watched as the vehicle tumbled down into the dark waters below. Silence. Then, a deep breath. "We're alive," the old friend whispered. They sat in stunned silence. Then, sirens, but this time, they weren't the enemies. The police arrived. Not corrupt officers, but the ones who had been waiting for proof. The ones who had seen the files. Their fight was finally over. The aftermath. Days later, the news exploded. Corrupt officials were arrested. Officers who had been working for the criminals were exposed. And the woman? She was safe, for the first time in years. As for him, the man who had only stopped to help with a flat tire? His life had changed forever. "You saved me," she told him one evening, as they watched the news. He shook his head. "I just did what was right." She smiled. "And sometimes,